Okay, so let me make sure I am streaming the correct stuff. Okay, I just see me and then I see you med laughing. And for some reason, it's only showing speaker view, gallery view. It's not showing each person, but that's okay. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Digital Fortress. We're going to go over some information today on Pledge and A0. Pledge doesn't really make a big difference on the Cardano protocol. It's kind of like I don't know, a glitch, like it's not doing what it's supposed to do. A naught and K parameters. I know we've been discussing this exhaustively for quite some period of time. So we have here today, we have Nick from Crown. His stake pool is Crown. Hello, Nick. Thank you for
Hi.
being here in Digital Fortress. And we also have Umed from stake pool
Hi.
Sky. He's got pool Sky over there. Thank you guys for coming on today. And there's also some information we'll go over later about the IOG blog post about delegator and stake pool operator guidelines. They are guidelines or suggested training, I guess you would say, for delegators. But we're going to start off with Nick's going to talk with us about the current state of things, and he has some slides to present. So if you want to go ahead and bring those up, Nick, and say hi while you're at it.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Nick. I run Crown Stake Pool. So I want to pull up a screen share here. Give me a second.
And if you end up with questions in chat, we'll get to some of your questions a little bit later today.
Okay, so to start off with, this has been out on Twitter quite a bit. I sent this out. I wrote this article back in September, and it kind of goes into this, and maybe we can throw it into just in the description later on. But it talks about how when I was messing around with A naught, how I was unable to get much of a difference between a 1 million pledge pool, as an example, and a 10,000K pledge pool. But really, that article does an okay job, but this spreadsheet shows it a little better. What I have here are some assumptions, and this is just an example. I set K equal to 500, which that's where we're going to. I mean, later on, we'll be going to 1,000. But right now, K equals 500. The delegation amount in this example is a delegator that has 100,000 Cardano. Fixed costs are minimum, which is pretty much what everybody's doing. And then I set the pool margin to 2%. So what I did was I made a column here for a pool that has 10,000K pledge and a pool that has a million pledge. And then I went through A naught and set it at 0.3. Let me make this bigger here. Set it
Looks
at,
good. Looks
okay,
good.
good. Okay. I set it at 0.3, and then I ran the numbers on the official rewards calculator as from the perspective as being a delegator. And this is the difference I got between a million pledge and a 10,000 pledge. And that was somewhat expected because A naught is so low. And then as you step A naught up, ignoring what it's doing to the rewards, just for right now, completely ignore that. But this is the incentive that people are going to act on to choose what pool to delegate to. And I wasn't able to get an entire ADA for the entire year. So I was only going to get 0.29. Now, if you go to 30 million pledge, this is out of the range of what we have as pool operators, but if there was a pool that had that, you start getting a little bit of a difference. But percentage wise, going back to the 100,000, this is very, very, very small. So that's what I saw, and that's what motivated me to write this article. So if you have time, you can check it out. It goes into more detail what I'm talking about, and that's pretty much what I have to show you on that screen there. So
Okay, that's excellent, Nick. Thank you for that. So that shows our current state of with A naught and K settings to how they work. And as you can see, from the pool operator perspective, there's a very small difference by pledging more, demonstrating that pledge it doesn't work. Because if you get, and I'll give you a perfectly realistic example, if you get a mild rise in the price of ADA, There's going to be people to say, you know what, I would rather if you're staking 10 million, or I'm sorry, if you're pledging 10 million and the price of ADA doubles overnight, someone might say, really, I'm staking this for that much. Oh, Charles is here. All right, that's cool. Hey, Charles, I'm gonna have bring Charles in. That's fantastic. Thank you, Nick, for giving that presentation. I think that explained the current state extremely well. And Charles, thank you for coming in. I appreciate it. Sorry for the last minute notice. Would you
Well,
give me?
I just got home and I was finishing off dinner. So anyway, I figured I'd drop by for a few minutes and see what you guys were up to.
Yeah, thank you for popping in. I totally appreciate it. I very much appreciate it. Nick just gave a quick, brief description of the current state of A naught settings and if you turn A naught up, how that affects the returns for the pool operator to where it's pretty minimal at this point
Right.
with the spreadsheet on with K equals 500 and he ran A naught at 0.3, 0.6, 1, 2, and 4, I think it was, Nick. And then UMed ran some spreadsheets using the new curved pledge parameter techniques and a few other things. So I'm sure you've heard some feedback, Charles, already on the current pledge parameters.
I mean, no matter what parameter is set for what, no one's going to be happy with it. And that gives me some hope because it means that first, people are paying attention, and second, people are acting in their self-interest. I mean, the problem with these systems is you have to parameterize them in a way where you have kind of sometimes conflicting demands. And so on one side, you say, okay, we want stability and reliability. On the other side, we'd like diversity. So we'd like, for the sake of resilience, not to have the same five guys showing up again and again and again. So when you have a very fragile, highly optimized system, you tend to have the same five guys again and again and again, and they all get very uniform hardware and they co-locate and these things, and you get good quality of service. But when they screw up, there's a cascading failure and the entire system falls apart. So you'd say, no, 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 it's a much better situation to have diversity where you have 1,000 different guys and gals floating around and they're running different hardware and different hosting infrastructure and they're in different geographies. But when you do that, then you potentially compromise the quality of service and reliability of the system. And then also you get a lot more variability inside the system. So some days it does things well, other days it doesn't. And then there's the quintessential question of wealth distribution. So in all things equal, you'd like the system to be equally fair to those who have very little compared to those who have a lot. And the problem is that that's not true in life. And then there's also skill asymmetries as well. So certain people are very good at marketing and they're very good at branding. And so even if they have very little, if they're very good at marketing and branding, they can get an outsized influence inside the system. So, the sticker price was that we'd like to have 1,000 stake pools, and we consider that a good 1.0. And then we'd also like to have a community-wide discussion about different parameters, like, for example, A naught.
Mm-hmm.
And we've already received community input. And the advantage we have is that we have people like Colin Edwards, who I think was on your show. Or
He was with UMed over there on
Yeah.
the slot leader. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Colin's a quant, and we also obviously have the Oxford crew led by Elias, who think about these things. And so we're studying alternatives and other things, but there's some very nice game theoretic properties that the system has, and it depends on the myopic equilibria and how these things are actually interpreted work. And so the problem is that if you move in one direction, you lose some nice game theoretic properties even though it may seem to be more egalitarian at the edges. If you move in the other direction, you get more desirable game theoretic properties. So you have more security potentials, but maybe it's less egalitarian. So it's a real hard problem in that respect. And we wrote a philosophy document on it. We've written some blog posts on it, and we're going to create some dedicated content to better educate people why we chose the initial parameterizations that we did. But here's the real cool thing about all of it. These conversations we're having right now, the opportunity to change things is coming when Voltaire is fully turned online. All system parameters from K to how A naught works and these other things can basically be voted on and changed through the CIP process. And so as Catalyst evolves and we get more participation and more of the network turns on and the voting system solidifies, then that's the perfect time to actually ask questions of, well, where does the community want to set? Do they want to sit in high optimization and perhaps less egalitarian with larger operators, or do they want to go with more resilience, smaller operators, and less optimization, but more egalitarian?
Yeah.
The other side of it is that there's this concept of sum zero and competitive pressure. So the current staking reality is that you have an atomic choice. You have a wallet, you have all these little tiles, and you got to pick one. And that means you're picking a grain of sand off the beach.
Yeah.
That's not a good situation. What you'd like to do is pick a portfolio where you collect 10 or 15 or 20 tiles, or you take a curated list from Umed or from Spakra or from Rick or somebody who the community trusts and say, this is what I think is right. For example, I decided to filter out all the 1% pools, or I decided to do this or that. That's a personal opinion of the list maker. And those people can basically create a portfolio and people can delegate accordingly. So this is also a choice architecture problem as much as it is a parameterization problem. And I'd argue it's actually more a choice architecture problem than a parameterization problem. And then you'll actually see coalitions form. An analogy is actually in Africa. We do a lot of business in Ethiopia, and there's an agency there called the agricultural. It's called. Anyway, the name escapes me from it. It'll come to me in just a second. But they create these things called ACCs, Agricultural Commercialization Clusters. So the ATA, the Agricultural Transformation Agency, is what it's called. It's led by Khaled Bamba. And anyway, they had this problem where they have all these small farmers, 15 million of them, smallholder farmers that live on less than a hectare of land. And any individual farmer, no matter what government policy you adopt, has almost no economic identity, because they're simply too poor, too small, too disconnected for them to actually be able to influence anything. So the very first thing the ATA did was that they collectively grouped them into what are called ACCs, Agricultural Commercialization Clusters. So they collectively bargain and they collectively decide what crops they're going to grow and collectively sell and so forth. That one change massively improved everything for them, from fertilizer to farming practices to agricultural output to wealth creation, more egalitarian creation. So to draw an analogy, a lot of small pool operators, when you have portfolios, can band together and they can get a much fairer treatment collectively in the system than if they were individuals in the system. And that's where we're really going to explore that space, I think, in the next 6 months to a year. And then, the community will have a lot of ideas of things to do. So it's a great problem to think about, very complicated. That's why we have papers out of Oxford University. And it's really cool to see that people are actually reading those papers. Most of them go unread in people's careers, and you guys are taking it real seriously.
Yeah, these ones are definitely getting looked at. And, I do got to say, Charles, we are in a good place right now because we're discussing things like A0 and K parameters and how we would like to see the network move forward. Like, for example, we're not in a position ETH 2.0 is in right now. We're in a lot better position, in my opinion. I think
have champagne problems here.
Yeah. So that's just an example, not beating up on ETH 2.0. So what we're so to summarize real quickly for folks who are in the chat and watching the video right now, when Charles, when you say egalitarian, kind of let me break this down into the hardcore what it is, right?
Right.
If we make pledge too attractive or too advantageous, then the wealthiest organizations in the world will win, right? They will buy up ADA or whatever it is if they want to, if they find it attractive. If they find it attractive enough, they will purchase the ADA, build the pools, and they will crush even pools like mine, right? And
actually the problem is further exacerbated by exchanges, because what they can do is they can just simply pledge with ADA they don't even own, and because no one actually has to delegate to them, they can just run private saturated pools and all kinds of shit.
And to me, and we were talking about this right before we started, you Med and Nick as well, it's like, okay, I'm prepared for that. I'm prepared to compete with that. Right, guys? We're prepared to try. We'll do our best. We'll give it our best shot. Go for it, right? If that's what we got to do, we're going to give it our best. So the egalitarian part is that the rich get richer. And then the other swing side of that, if you make it ultra fair, where pledge doesn't even matter at all, which is currently where it's at right now, pledge doesn't really matter at all. Then what happens at that point is the network has less security to it. And if everyone, I don't know if you guys agree, but security is the number one priority. But then you have more civil attack possibility, and you also have the ability for people to spin up pools for almost no cost whatsoever, and then you can see where that goes, like tens and tens or hundreds of pools, however many they want,
Right.
because there's almost no cost, right? There's barely any skin in the game in that sense. All right, so yeah,
Yeah, I
those are
mean,
the two extremes we're talking about.
I've looked at the numbers. Pool tool. Mike gave me the numbers for Epoch 2224, and I looked at the stake distribution, and as it currently stands, at least at at Epoch 224, we have half of the stake, basically distributed across 374 pools. And the cost of attack is $8.9 million, basically, if you just take it with current exchange rate. Now, if we are talking about security, we need to move that into a spot where we are all comfortable, and it will be a cross section between what the distribution of pledges is for the staple operators. Let's say that majority of us fall. I would just rank the whole thing, and I would say, okay, take the top, let's say 25th percentile, and then just pick that number as some sweet spot. That if I have, let's say, if that number is, let's say, $2 million, right, and I only have 1 million. I will strive to get to that 2 million. So it just basically pushes me to get to that 2 million, to make maximum rewards. And if you have more than 2 million, then you could have two pools, things like that. But again, it will make the pools, the whole ecosystem, more resilient towards 51% attacks. And I think if you go to 1,000 pools, it becomes very expensive. At least $100 million, I think, if my calculations are correct. If we could find a function that accelerates really fast from 0, let's say, to 1 million, and then just tapers off, and then goes to to whatever the saturation point is, maybe you could do something. If that function satisfies the game theoretic requirements of the network, then we should be okay. I mean, I've ran some scenarios here I could show, but yeah, I mean, the problem with current A0 parameter is that it's linear, and that's okay, I think. But the second problem is that we are too far away from the saturation, because if you're closer to the saturation, you're going to be fine in terms of like having a pool that is closer to saturation. You're going to have a difference in returns that would be quite natural for people to pick your pool. But since we are too far away from that, we need to think about a number of pools that we need to have in the ecosystem. And I think I was playing with a number of 2,000. That could give us something. I don't know how other people think, but that could give us, playing with these numbers actually could come up with some sort of a range that the pool operators could be comfortable with, and the range that actually creates some difference.
And you have some slides for that. Can you show those to us? And at some point, we'll also discuss the IOG article that was posted, the blog post from Professor Agelos Kiayas about guidelines. Okay, so what do you got on your slides there, Umed, that you prepared for this?
Oh, sure. I can show it to you.
This is where if you use CIP7, for example, right?
Yeah, I do have CIP7, and I compare it with current sort of curve also, so you could see what the difference is. And Sean has done a great job in terms of, making it sort of comparable or interoperable with the current curve. So here, I mean, I've been playing with some numbers. You can see that. Is
this current or is this CIP7?
No, this is current. So this is the current. Okay. Set of parameters. So we have, I mean, I put the row at 60, but I can just change it to 0.30%. And then we have a knot at 0.3, and I'm just looking at this final state, right? So if we just basically go with what we have, right, and don't change anything. Just the K changes to 1,000. And I've taken, these two numbers. Basically, I say, let's say that majority of pool operators have 500K, and we would like to basically have that as a sweet spot. So, and I compare it to the zero pledge pool, and I compare it to the 100K pledge pool, and the ROS difference is pretty low per year. And if you translate it into a variable fee, which I've done here, it means that the pool that has 500K can charge 0.46% more than the pool that has 10K. In other words, the steepness of the slope is pretty low here. So there's not a whole lot of difference that you could advertise. So in order to fix that, and then I've been playing with this, and I said, okay, well, let's just increase A0 in its current form, right? Let's just do 6 or something. So does it create a difference? Yes, it does, right? But here's the kick. Your returns get really smashed. So you're not going to have a lot of returns. So while there's a difference in returns, the returns themselves, the absolute value of returns basically goes down, which is not an ideal situation for the pool operator. So a lot of people might want to just basically say, let's just keep it at a low level because at least I'm going to be earning some ROS. So changing A0, A0 by itself is not a good idea in just this case. So that's what I would think. So the second option is that, well, why don't we just pick some other number, right? Say 2.5, right? And okay, well, we have kind of the same situation here. And we say, okay, fine. In this case, we have low returns. Well, why don't we just increase the row? And if we are open to that, and if we jack it up to 0.60%, then we actually increase the returns. And here, the returns actually increase to a degree that it's more or less in line. If you look at this section over here, if most of the pool operators fall within this section, then we are going to be back at the place where we started. And if you basically increase, on top of that, you increase the number of pools to 2,000, that increases even further, right? Because we are closer to the saturation point. And if you look at these numbers in terms of variable fee difference, you can clearly see that nobody is going to give their ADA to pools with a 0 pledge or 10,000 pledge, because your returns are just much better in these scenarios. So this is just basically not changing the function itself. And what if we, and I looked at the proposal by Sean, and I said to myself, what if we actually, took that function and implemented that function? What would be the results with the same inputs? And the results are this. Basically, this is basically the same set of inputs, but the results are much better in terms of ROS. So if you have a 0 pledged pool, your returns is going to be 3.5. But if you pledge 10,000, the return goes up significantly, and it just goes up and up and up. And graphically, you can see this in this graph over here. So the yellow is the current curve, and the blue is the proposed curve by Sean. And I've picked some of these factors by myself, but this is just parameter, as you can just play with it. So the difference here is that you could get to the same endpoint, but the path towards that endpoint is different. You get acceleration in the beginning, and then it kind of tapers off in the case of Sean's CIP7, whereas in the current version of A0, you kind of have an exponential growth that kind of grows up really fast at the end. So that's basically the point of my presentation here.
Thank you, Med. You can bring that screen share down. I appreciate it. And there are a couple of questions in chat that have come up. But I think what's importantly with the current parameters, the current state of Cardano right now, didn't you find a happy point that we could reach at some point in the future? Did you hit numbers earlier? It was like an A naught of 0.6 at K equals 3,000, or it was A naught of 6, K equals 3,000.
Well, that was one of the earlier simulations that I did.
Yeah.
I think that one is worse than what I have come up with in the latest one. So if we don't change anything, right, we might, and if we are open to changing the row and the number of pools, I don't know. I picked something that might make sense. But I mean, again, you know, this is something that we will need to decide. So this scenario that I picked, the row is 0.60, the A naught is 2.5, and then the K is 2,000. But no changes to the curve.
That seems like a reasonable, happy place based on your current community of stake pool operators.
Yeah, I mean, it just goes, you know, you go back to sort of 5%-ish ROS. If you have a pledge of, let's say, 3 million, that's where it's kind of aspirational in a sense, you know.
Okay.
You want to have a carrot in front of you a little bit so that, you know, the stake pool operators start accumulating that ADA.
Yeah. And make it, yeah.
Hey, Rick, one of the things that I was, you know, thinking about as I look over all this is you have different motivations, I guess. You have the delegator's perspective, and they're trying to maximize returns. And you have the pool ops, all the operators running pools. If we're treating it like a business, the whole purpose of a business is to maximize profits. And then you have what the network wants, which is security. So my point is, if you can find something where all that stuff meshes together just right, that is the formula that is going to work, I think, overall, again, in my opinion, to, I guess, maybe solve some of the issues we're having. And an example is, if somebody has a million ADA to pledge, there should be zero incentive to run 100 pools at 10,000 pledge with low fees. Like you would want to incentivize a single pool operation with a full pledge. And then the same thing goes for, you know, running 10 pools at 100K pledge. There shouldn't be an incentive for that either. The incentive should be, let's run one pool at full pledge. Now, if you have a huge amount of ADA and you get out of that, because there's a range we all have as pool operators, whatever that is, you can call it what you want, 10,000 to 1 million, go up to 2 million, whatever the case may be. But this new formula, in my opinion, needs to work for that specific range that we have as operators, because our pledge is a resource that we're putting out to the network. And if we can't get a difference and a return to the delegator for that range, then I don't see it working. You know, I think we really need to dial that in moving forward if we can do that with these new proposals that are coming up.
Yeah, Nick, I'm glad you kind of put it that way. You got to think about the delegators and the delegators' perspective. How does your pledge give them more returns, right?
Right.
In the pool operator perspective, and we're still ironing out the pool operator perspective. I think the delegator perspective is working okay now, but I think we need to be talking about that more also. But right now we got to get the pool thing right, especially with, I'm sure there's an engineering requirement for how many pools do you need, for how many dataless wallets are open and all that kind of stuff. I don't know what it is, but in the future, as Cardano continues to expand, you'll need more nodes up. You'll need more pools up. You'll need more things that, you know, keeping track of the blockchain, all that cool stuff. But we're not even at that point yet. We don't know what that number is. Maybe IOG knows what that number is. But you also kind of segue into, with the IOG blog post article that came out recently with Professor Kiayas, where it's good training. It's always good to educate. You want to educate the delegators. But where I see that article begin to fall apart is once you start to hit millions and millions and billions of people. You know, a blog post like that is not going to make people good actors. The protocol has to handle it. And Charles, if you disagree with me, if you have a different opinion on that, that's fine as well.
Yeah, but remember, this is a system just in its infancy. And, you know, where would we be at once we're at millions to billions of users? the likeliness of us having just a single token to govern the construction of blocks is very low. With proof of stake, it's all about an endogenous resource in the system, and right now that's ADA. Okay, but it's entirely possible in 5-10 years we create some sort of merit token based upon other desirable behavior, like maybe being an expert in Catalyst or some other mechanism that has yet to be invented. And then that can bias your chance of making blocks in addition to ADA. So it's very possible we're going to move from a single resource to a multi-resource system. Second, there's this idea of delegation portfolios. And what we don't want to have happen is people make the decision atomically of Alice versus Bob. Rather, they delegate to a collection of actors. And portfolios tend to normalize. They tend to aggregate to a rough amount of returns. I mean, what's the difference between one mutual fund and another mutual fund? At some point, the ROI starts converging to the same set. So that's probably what's going to end up happening. And this just becomes a background feature that people have, and they don't concern themselves too much about it. And also, it makes you feel a little bit better about randomization in the delegation, right? You can just click an auto delegate feature, and it's much more fair than it would be at the moment. As a final point to that, the reality is that our goal with Cardano 2020 has always been to get to a stable system that is self-amending. So it has the ability to update itself. So the question is, when does that happen? Well, D has to hit 0. I'd like 1,000 pools. I'd like full peer-to-peer. And we need a properly functioning update system and a governance system. At that point, I imagine there's going to be a monetary policy committee. If it doesn't exist at the Cardano Foundation, it's going to be created by the community itself. And then that committee will create proposals and discuss things, and the people will vote on those things accordingly. And there's all kinds of debates that are going to occur there. So between now and 5 years or 10 years, when we get between where we're at and millions to billions of users, we're probably going to have 4 or 5 major iterations of the reward system in general, much more complicated way of participating consensus. Plus, there's also other revenue lines that are coming. So when Hydra comes, for example, that's a revenue stream there. Bridges between other cryptocurrencies, there's a revenue line there. The potential for native assets to pay transaction fees in that native asset creates an ETF on all tokens issued in the system that are escalated to that point, and also subsidized side chains. So, for example, we are exploring the idea of, if we were running side chains, could we increase the inflation rate slightly and allow stake pool operators to make revenue from not only maintaining the main network, but also the side chains as well, or perhaps be paid the native token of that side chain. So all these things go into consideration over the next 5 or 10 years. The point of the article from Agalos was just to say, okay, we need to explain where our first principles thinking came from, what we were trying to maximize and optimize for stabilizing the system. And the definition of success is the system is stable, not necessarily that the system is fair or inclusive for everybody. That's the next generation of the system, where we recognize that there are issues. And then the community has obviously a variety of recourses. Some we can propose, some you guys propose. And the point is, there's a change management system that you have a high degree of faith in that allows you to change it in that particular direction. And let me be clear about one caveat. It is not the case that just because a pool has gone out of business that the system is a failure. That's like saying that VCs are a failure because 90% of the businesses that they invest in go out of business. Kleiner Perkins has that statistic, and obviously the most successful VC in the world. So you don't look at the particular, you look at the trends. You say, okay, overall, is the system starting to converge to a stable state and having a reasonable set of actors who are making a reasonable amount of income? Or is it the case that most of the actors are struggling and there are problems there? Then obviously there's an issue. And the other thing is that transaction volume is going to start paying a lot of money when we get to millions to billions of users as well. What happens when there are 500 million transactions a week on Cardano and all those fees accumulate? That's part of the rewards in addition to the inflation reward. In fact, Bitcoin used to measure this. It was called Bitcoin network deficit. And that was the difference between transaction fees and the actual inflation. And I guess for some reason they stopped creating those charts because they've never been positive. So a lot to think about in these things. But it's a fair point, Rick, is that you're saying, look, unless it's Barney style, it's idiot proof, it ain't going to work for the mainstream. And you can't expect people to understand the nuances of these economic parameters. Those have to be hidden from the user at some point, and the system still has to be able to function.
Yeah. Yeah, and I agree, and I think it's also a fair point that I made. Like in proof of work, you don't have to ask the proof of work pools. You don't have to ask them to hand over their hashing power and say, "Hey, you need to send some hashing power my way because I'm struggling over here." And the proof of work miners, which is the equivalent of wallets, they don't have to ask each other to play nice. I mean, education is good, but do you think Cardano can withstand anything that's thrown at it by the biggest players out there right now? Like, can it take the heat from if some all-powerful adversary shows up with a big bag? Do you think we can win? I think we're stable, but do you think we can?
Well, the advantage of having an endogenous resource as opposed to exogenous resources, if you have hostile stake, you can simply fork it out of the system. It is the worst case scenario, and it's certainly not something you do lightly. But if you have this George Soros boogeyman who shows up and says, "Yeah, I'm going to destroy the whole system," you could just simply identify that stake, blacklist it, and then basically remove its stake rights. I mean, you would then have this problem of fidelity and code is law and these things. But that's an example of a recovery mechanism when you have a hostile majority stake inside the system. The other thing that proof of stake has that makes it so damn secure, especially when it's smaller, is that people are literally burning their own money when they attack the system. So there has to be some external reward for that, either for a Goldfinger attack. Whereas proof of work, that's not the case. This is why maximalism exists. If you have multiple proof of work chains with relatively the same hash power, with the same algorithm and the same price, I have an incentive to destroy all of them except for one and short sell them on the way down, and then mine the last one, and then I still make the same ROI out of my mining equipment plus all the excess gains of destroying the other systems. That is not the case with proof of stake. You only get one shot, and so you're the last chain in that respect. And so there's a endogenous maximalism that's not present there.
Yeah, because your ADA is the miner, and if you destroy your miner, you just destroyed your own value.
Yeah.
So that is the benefit, or I guess the strong point on proof of stake is that ADA is the miner. When you sell a miner and buy a new one, it's the equivalent would be you sold your ADA and bought something else.
And by the way, we don't have to do any bonding or slashing. All these other systems, they just take it as an axiom that you must do this for the system to function properly. We don't have to do that. It's an amazing thing.
That's one of the most beautiful parts of this protocol. It's just such a beautiful piece of I just can't believe that other people have to go through those kind of pains in order to stake.
Yeah.
It's and the other thing that kind of caught my attention, Charles, in that article was that I was reading the part with about the leverage, and I understand that leverage is a problem if the K is low, right? If you have 150 pools and then there's no incentive to pledge a lot, then you might have nefarious actors take over the network, especially if the K is low because they're leveraged and if they get full. But what happens when we have 1,000 pools? Is this still going to be a problem?
Well, it's always going to be an issue when you have unfavorable Gini coefficient in your system. So that's one dimension of it. And then the other side of it is that social responsibility comes into play. So how good is your identity management system, your ability to distinguish unique pools and root out actors who run multiple pools and so forth. In practice, we are seeing that certain pool operators happen to be replicating a lot of pools and running them. Yours truly as well, but ours because we just simply have so much ADA that that's the way the protocol works. But we are going to consolidate that a bit. So I think the problem will be reduced as K increases, but it's not necessarily going to go away. And this is the point of really carefully understanding the interplay of these parameters, as well as potentially developing a new reward mechanism for the parameter. And then there's a lot of exotic things you could throw on. So, there's punitive measures that you can introduce into the protocol. We chose not to do that, but there are certainly things you can do where if you generate counterproductive behavior, you could freeze funds for a period of time, or you can charge higher transaction fees to be able to spend those blacklisted funds, or these other things. So there's all kinds of stuff you can introduce to try to mitigate adversarial behavior that's detected, or counterproductive behavior. But so far, the protocol's stable, block production is high. You guys have been doing a great job as stake pool operators. And so there's no need to actually even consider punitive measures at the moment. And going back to that whole egalitarianism, this is the choice architecture problem as well, that I keep coming back to. If it's atomic choices, it's a game of who has the best marketing. If there are different choices like portfolios, then it's a game of who can collaborate and cooperate the best. And how do you market a coalition better than an individual? And that kind of changes the whole dynamics. For example, when we start talking about coalitions, you could have a policy that if you have many pools, you only get one in the coalition. So pick which one, right? So that's something you guys could decide. And if there's a bias in delegation to coalitions over individual pools, then probably a lot of the behavior we're seeing at the boundaries that's problematic will go away very quickly, because it's just not profitable anymore.
Okay. And that kind of answers some of the questions that were in the chat that were from Greg B. And there's actually a couple of questions in there. Do you think it's currently problematic with how pools are operating? Now, I'm of the mindset the market will take care of itself. And if people want to operate at 0%, they can, even if I don't like it. My opinion is, okay, I don't care for that. But there's, Pay did a video over on his channel from Bloom over on his Big Pay channel. And he demonstrated that there were over 200 pools running at 0%. I mean, does anyone view that as problematic? Not that it's a bad business practice. Well, I mean, the idea is to attract.
We have actually an actual economic term for that. It's called predatory capitalism. So, you remember when Walmart moves into the small town and drives all the small town guys out of business. And what they do is they undercut all of the other people, even if they run out of loss, to basically drive them out of business. And once they've been driven out of business, then they have a monopoly within that market. Predatory capitalism presupposes that there's a barrier to entry and startup cost that's sufficient that when you renormalize the prices above the predatory level, that it's simply just too expensive for people to come compete with you. But if you engage in predatory capitalism in a system like this, because the startup cost is simply too low, it stands to reason that you'll actually see pools flood back in after they've seen that. The other thing is that, of course, you can change the choice architecture. Like Amerco was considering with Yoroi to not show pools that fall below a certain percentage return. We could certainly do that as well. But I think actually the best way of approaching it is user choice. So I want to get rid of being in the Smash business and have user created Smash, and the user can download their own listing servers. And so Pool Tool can create one, or others can create them. And then when you click it, you can have radically different choice architecture, radically different presentations of the pools, some of which may philosophically choose to omit tiles that fall below a certain minimum profit margin. So these are examples of things that will kind of throw a monkey wrench into the standard way of things. So nothing is going to stay stable. There's going to be a lot of experimentation over the next 3 to 6 months. And ultimately, I think the system will stabilize. And by the way, it's already demonstrating a lot of stability. As I mentioned, the network quality, I think, is well above 90%. And we have no indication that the stake pool operators can't run Cardano. And we could probably put D equals 0 today, and the system would run just fine.
Yeah, I think so too. Some of the metrics I've looked at is on Pool Tool. If you look at the reported block height time delay, it's almost always at 100%. Out of 160 reporting pools, it's at 100%. I think that's a good indication. Yeah, I think other things though, I mean, it's good. I think it's pretty stable. And another thing, for example, I see Pay's in chat. Good to see you there, Pay. I mean, he brought up a really good point, for example, because this was mainly about pledge and A0 and how do we get from there? How do we get to there from here where we're at today? One really good example he brought up was if you do a pool with 10,000 pledge and the same amount of stake, and a pool at 2.5 million pledge and the same amount of stake, the advantage of the pool operator having all of that pledge only comes out to hundreds of ADA per year. So there's no real incentive to keep the pledge high. How do we get over that hump? You know what I mean? I don't mean to put you, Johnny, on the spot, but if anybody has any ideas, how do we get over that hump to where pledge has a significant enough meaning and we're willing to accept the fact that it might cause smaller pools to get destroyed. I mean, just for
Right.
lack of a better word, it
But
might cause a
but again,
barrier
remember,
to
pledge is
entry.
just a civil attack mitigation mechanism, and
Uh-huh.
so you should monitor the system to see if that you're actually experiencing that attack. And then I would hazard that it's probably better to adjust that parameter based upon real life data than avoiding a theoretical possibility because there's elasticity in the system. It's easy to change these parameters with an update. So right now, it makes sense to encourage smaller operators to come in or pool diversity because you're going to have this Cambrian explosion and extinction where a lot of people are going to wake up, try the business, not like it, and then eventually leave. And then there'll be some stability. And then it may make sense to actually start increasing pledge benefits at that point and forming coalitions where groups of people form together and meet that pledge threshold, encouraging smaller operators to aggregate, like I mentioned, the agricultural commercialization clusters, that kind of a business model. The advantage there would be potentially you could have better operations of those pools, more reliable operations of those pools, but you're still having some diversity because the pools aren't necessarily owned by one entity. They could be owned
Okay.
by a collective of entities.
Is there any signs or indications that would say now is the time that we should raise A0 or not raise A0, besides my ridiculous Twitter polls?
That's the point of like a monetary steering committee. And I think that's actually, now that the CIP committee is starting to really mature at the Cardano Foundation, it would make a lot of sense for the Cardano Foundation to start forming a group of industry experts within Cardano to actually start having those discussions. And then you have to be objective about it. To Crown's point, there's it's almost like the CIA trilemma, the triad where you have confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And when you're building an information security system, there's no perfect system. You have to pick some point on that triangle to be, and you live with it, accepting there are trade-offs. Well, similarly, certain things you do reduce your security, but give you other benefits, and vice versa. So you just basically have to have, a discussion with the community about where do they want to live in that triad. And then if the system is stable and you have consistency, it's probably a good choice, even though some people are going to be upset about it.
Yeah,
Another
there's always some trade-offs. Nick, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Nick.
another point that I've thought about is when pledge doesn't matter and you have the wallet rankings. So if pledge mattered, then they would be higher up on the rankings in the wallets, and the delegation would find its way to those pools. And that's not happening. So the only thing you're left with when pledge doesn't matter is just cutting fees to get higher up in the rankings. And that's my opinion. And that's kind of what I've observed happening on why we're seeing the race to 0% and why there's so many pools running that is because it's the only way you can get up in those rankings is to go zero. And I'm not going to go to zero. I've made that decision. And if my pool dies because of it, then so be it. But I'm not going to go to 0%. So if we can fix that problem, make pledge matter, I think it'll take care of itself. And those pools will be ranked higher. And then the 0% stuff goes away.
There is some kind of magic number around 600K. I found it by poking around in there. Where if a pool has very low stake and you start off with a certain amount of pledge, it'll get ranked, okay? But those numbers aren't advertised really hard until recently. Like people don't know, all right, what's my plan here? How am I going to get enough pledge to start up a pool or something like that? It's just kind of random, throw some darts at it, and then basically go on social media and either advertise to try to attract delegations or make enough noise to where you either get IOG to change a K parameter or make enough noise to where people are going to, maybe I should check out that
We're
poll.
only ever going to change it twice. After it hits K equals 1,000, guys, I'm done with playing central bank in that respect.
Okay.
It's your decision at that point. You can downscale, you can upgrade it. And also, I'm done with choice architecture. I'd like it to be user driven with many different ways of doing ranking and listing. I mean, the ranking was very difficult because it's one of those things where you have to have momentum in history in order to have a more accurate ranking mechanism. And then you have to balance things like fees to reliability, to pledge, to other factors in the system. And I think the system is finally starting to actually display ranking correctly. There was actually a 2-month period where the software needed to be upgraded to a point where Pledge was actually working properly. And people freaked out with, I think it was Daedalus 2.4, when ranking was finally being displayed correctly, but unfortunately it had the unintended consequence of graying out a lot of tiles. Boy, that was
terrible.
that was a fun day. But you know, things are gradually, you know, moving in the right direction in that respect. But if you're making group decisions over individual decisions, I think it's going to sort it out. Because at the end of the day, the problem is, even if you're top ranked, you know, if why wouldn't a person just choose number one over number two over number six or something? You know, and then marketing has a huge play in these types of things. Whereas if you're making group decision, that's a whole different situation, because then you have to visualize those differently, and you have kind of different parameters in respect. So I'm first to admit that I'm unhappy with it, but you know, it's kind of like one of those best of the worst type of a deals, where it's, you have to start somewhere, and then you basically look at the outcomes, and then you say, okay, well, how can we change it? This is why Tim is so involved and Agalos is so involved and other people with the pool operators, because we get a constant line of feedback from them. And that disgruntlement is something they listen to on a daily basis. And there are certainly a lot of questions. The other problem, guys, is that the same team that builds Shelley and upgrades these things is also the team that's responsible for building Goguen. So when you look at the Node team and these other guys, the Goguen team was isolated for a really long time, but now they're handing off all that infrastructure to the Node team to start integrating into the Cardano node. So I could tell them, hey, go focus on some Shelley related stuff, or I could tell them and stop the Goguen integration, or I could say focus on the Goguen integration and actually, you know, don't worry too much about changing, let's say, a reward function or the ledger rules or these types of things. So it's a resource management issue. Like, for example, I'd love to have hybrid wallets, and I'd love to have partial delegation. These are very important things for getting to portfolios. That's not going to happen until Q1 of next year, because I would have to tell the Adrestia team to stop doing multi-sig and multi-asset integration, for example. If I had them do that. And I can't scale up these teams anymore. We have this situation where they're at maximum capacity. So adding more engineers would not speed anything up in an appreciable way. It would actually slow us down. So, you know, a little bit of patience would be nice. I know how hard that can be, but it's my goal to get to diversity. It's my goal to get to different choice architecture and eventually user-driven choice architecture. Another thing, guys, that I think is underappreciated is the ability to communicate with your customers. I've always been a huge proponent of PubSub. We need to get that in. Multi-sig is actually a big step there, because the same thing that allows you to do multi-sig signature coordination with Prism enabled probably gives us a good PubSub path that's very low cost, easy to implement. What does that mean? It means that when someone delegates to you as a pool operator, you can push messages to them right into Daedalus.
There goes my pool tool idea.
Yeah.
No, well, stick with it, Umed. You know, Umed was distracted there, Charles. You said Kegel's 1,000, and I saw his brain start cranking out. He's calculating. He's going, okay, if K's only going to ever equal 1,000, what's the optimal points? Right? That's what you're doing, right?
Yeah, I was playing with some. Yeah.
I knew it, man. I knew it. I can see them gears turning, man. The squirrels are all over your face.
So Charles, I wanted to ask actually to that question. Are you guys implementing the PubSub on the wallet backend?
Well, I want it damn near built into the network protocol itself. I've been asking Duncan and crew to do that for 4 years now.
All right.
One of these days they'll give me peer-to-peer, so we'll get there. But it's actually not hard to do a centralized PubSub system, and there's many off-the-shelf solutions we can roll in. So currently my plan is that once we finish the multi-signature coordination server, which Daedalus can feed into, if we can integrate Prism via the identity center into Cardano, and we're getting there. There's a whole team that's working on that. Then we can include in the DID document some form of a publication channel system. And then we should easily be able to create a situation where when person delegates to a stateful operator, they're also auto-subscribing to the pool's feed, and then you as an operator can push messages to the message center in Daedalus about things. Because there are a lot of charity pools out there, and they're like, hey, we'd like to show you use of funds or other such things. And that's an example of just having a better commercial relationship with your with the people who have invested in you. And then suddenly the ranking's a little different, because it's not just a mechanical colored tile.
Yeah.
There's actually a communication channel where you can build rapport and relationships with people. And also it's a signaling mechanism for stateful operators to ping each other as well. So you just have to think about DDoS resistance and all these other things. What's nice about a proof of stake system is it gives you that for free, because these people, you can't just be anybody, right? You have to actually have pledge and these things. So you've already mitigated a lot of that civil attack type of a stuff that comes into DDoS. But that's definitely coming, and it's not hard to implement in the centralized sense. Now, if I want to pull it into the network protocol and make a decentralized pub sub, so there's no notion of a centralized coordination server, that's much harder. And we did explore that with Poldercast. That was one of the principal reasons why I played with that protocol, is that it had a decentralized pub sub mechanism. Unfortunately, Poldercast has a lot of problems with it, as you guys experienced with the ITN. And in fact, the author of Poldercast is doing research with us now, Spiros, and we're actually looking and seeing if we can do some improvements to that design based upon things we learned from the ITN.
Yeah, that's good. Poldercast was a little aggressive, and we would tweak it up, and things would, it would work great, and we turn it down too low, and things would stop working. So that's good. I hope they make progress on the Poldercast. That's pretty awesome stuff. I think, Charles, I don't want to hold you here all night. Nick and UMed, do you guys have anything else you wanted to go over about the pledge A0, the social impact of IOG's article saying, oh, yeah, people need to play nice together or whatever? I mean, it's good to train people, like I said. Anything else before we wrap it up? I do have a few questions in chat. Oh, Charles, I got a stupid question for you. Are you okay with stupid questions?
Sure.
I mailed that pen from Japan. Did it ever make
I got it. I got
office?
the pen. I forgot to ping back and say thank you.
Okay.
I really appreciate it. It's a great weapon.
Yeah, because I don't speak Japanese very well, and I was trying to say, I was hand filling out the thing and everything, and I was like, here, I'll just pay whatever you ask. It was only $3.20.
Arigato gozaimasu.
Arigatou gozaimasu. Yeah, that's what I did. I said, hi, and then paid the money, and there it goes. All right. So, there were a few questions in chat communicating with delegators. Does the current Daedalus news feed, is there a way to send a message out through there where you could say, hey, everybody, saturation is dropping? It's hard to tell people, like, communication is important. People don't care if K equals 500. What they care is saturation, right?
Right.
So tell them saturation is dropping below 64 million.
Right.
You need to get
the whole message infrastructure is going to go through a major overhaul. And at the moment, we can push messages to you guys because we built it as a system for IOG to send to Daedalus users that things were happening. That was kind of stage one.
Okay.
And stage two is opening that up a little bit. The identity center is going to play a major role in that. And actually, I'd love to see the signal protocol pulled into the identity center, so you can do end-to-end encryption and perfect word secrecy in your communications when you push things to people.
Yeah, and Daedalus has to be open. Greg B brings up a good point. Where do delegators spend more time, looking at Daedalus or looking at YouTube or Twitter? That's a good point.
Well, eventually it'll be in the system tray, right? I've been pushing for that for a long time, that it runs as a background process, and I think it's just better for everybody. That team has a lot to do, and they're always shit rolls downhill, and there's the node, there's the wallet, and then there's Daedalus. So the node's got to be done, then you got to be done in Adrestia, then you got to be done in Daedalus, and like everything rolls downhill on them. So they have a hard time sometimes, but we've done a lot of engineering changes the last 6 months to make that more parallel, and you should see a renaissance with that framework in a bit.
And you got to get all the moving parts working together. There was a good question here I heard before. Why is there a hard cap? Why is there not a hard cap once saturation is reached? For example, could it be put in a wallet where the wallet just doesn't, oh, it's saturated, don't let them click on it? Or is that a bad idea? I don't know.
Well, there's probably some theoretical reason why that doesn't make sense. Go ahead.
Hey, Rick, I didn't mean to cut you off, Charles. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I just had a question is there any kind of timeline on maybe some communication to open up with between what's going on with the CIP curve pledge proposal and stake pool operators, as far as it'd be nice to have like a timeline to kind of get an idea of like where we're at on it and how long we're looking at till it's, if and when it'll be implemented.
Well, it has to go through an approval process to be implemented. And the other thing is that we're actually having Colin go through it very aggressively with Agalos. And what we're probably going to end up doing is improving it a little bit, because there are certain game theoretical analyses that have to be made, and maybe even a follow-up paper, and then we'll submit probably a CIP specifically to that matter. The problem is that the implementation would take some time. So even if it was ratified, as I mentioned, the people who would do that implementation are the same people who are currently integrating Goget into the system. So I don't really want to slow down smart contracts coming to the system. That's long overdue, and I got too long of a commercial pipeline. And this is kind of the hell I have as a product manager, is I have too many competing demands. There's like a demand for sidechains. There's the demand for wrapped assets in the system. There's a demand for smart contracts in the system. There's a huge demand for staking improvements, operational improvements to staking, so that you have like a segregation of environments with cold and hot. And then what you're mentioning is like refinements of the monetary policy of the system. And every one of them has to be balanced with the same set of implementers. And, we can't just hire more engineers and somehow it gets done. Where I have managed to parallelize some things is I've actually been bringing in more firms to do very specialized work. There's an exchange that shall remain nameless that I can't say anything about, that we actually hired a team of people to specifically write some software for them. And that's an example of where we were able to outsource a pile of work. I can't quite outsource the node work or the reward function work to another team because it's so specialized and the Haskell code is so unique. Although we just recently started negotiations, and I think we're finalizing it with a firm named Obsidian that's a Haskell firm, and they're actually going to come in and work on the update system for Cardano. Now, the advantage there is that because they're doing that, I can free up some resources to pull them back into the core node team to de-risk and accelerate some of the Plutus delivery. So your question is a little complicated because it's actually a product management question as much as it is a community question. And then the other thing is that I don't have the unilateral authority to just go and change the monetary policy of the system and say, oh, that looks shiny, let's go do that. I really need the ability to get community consent. So first, I need to know that they're informed. And second, we need a certain level of participation threshold for the system. So Catalyst has to kind of evolve a bit. And we were just exiting Fund 2, and the voting is done on a cell phone. Fund 3, the voting block should be done in Daedalus itself. And I think Fund 4, we should have even a better voting experience and perhaps meaningful percentages of people participating, like over 20 or 30%. At that stage, I think that's enough for us to actually reasonably start having discussions about voting on CIPs for community ratification. And then and changes to monetary policy or changes system level parameters like K would certainly be in the scope of that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I would really love to participate in the monetary policy CIP.
Yeah. Well, I've been talking to Fred a lot about this. I talk to Fred every week, the CEO of the Cardano Foundation, and I'm like, guys, we need industrial steering committees. We need community committees. And then we also need committees representing special demographics within the system, like perhaps a scientific committee and a monetary policy steering committee and so forth, where domain experts can basically come in from the community, and then they can annotate all of the CIPs and basically make sure that they are given a broad platform. And when I say a broad platform, dedicated content, YouTube videos, blog posts, special announcements, these types of things, and say, okay, well, this collection of experts are recommending that it gets pushed this way. A, it'll increase the chance it gets passed because marketing creates more visibility. And B, there's a great possibility that we'll see novel ideas coming from those commercial steering committees to change things. And one thing in particular is I'd like to scale up the Oxford relationship to increase and have more game theorists working on the system. And actually, I'd like to bring in some more quantitative analysts. It's been great having Colin around to actually analyze these things. And I think one or two more financial mathematicians could really benefit us because I love your approach. You have a spreadsheet. It's like we can talk about it, or we can just fuck around with the numbers and see what these things look like and ask ourselves, are these things feasible? That's a mentality that tends to be lacking when you're talking to people who worry about proofs and theory. They deal in abstractions, not particular numbers. And you need both sides for the system to be effective.
There you go, Umed. Put in a Project Catalyst proposal to support IOG's team on that, right? That sounds good, man. Hey, there's a few comments in chat. I'll hit on those real quick. Greg B. recommends putting a warning you're about to delegate to a pool currently providing reduced rewards due to oversaturation. Are you sure you want to continue? There's an example.
Right.
I've seen Vivi from Pool Vivi also recommend that. She made a graphic that would make a good warning label. Um, there was another question in here. It came up several times. Do you want to talk about 1% pools and 20 pools, and they've got a bunch of pools? I mean, I don't know if you guys wanted to comment on that. My take is it's an open market and they're complying with the protocol. I don't know. Is it a problem?
I mean, there's a problem from a security point of view, but when we are trying to, that's one of the things that kind of got me a little bit riled up. Because I grew up in Soviet Union, and every time I asked my dad or mom something that was not politically appropriate, they would just tell me to shush and tell me that they're going to lose their job. And I do not want to have sort of a system where we are, have to kind of abide by certain norms, like let's say one pool policy, right? It's somebody's choice. I respect that. But if I go ahead and the system not allows me, but does not discourage me or encourages me economically to make two pools, then I shouldn't be ostracized for that. And I'm not saying that I went out and created 100 pools, but there should be a distinction between, let's say, Digi or Sky or somebody else who has 3 pools and some nefarious actor that is flooding the whole system, right? You cannot just basically say, if you have more than one, you're just evil. It's like 1 or 0. And I think in general, the protocol should handle this in the sense that it needs to sort of create economic incentives around the local maxima of pledges, where both you could achieve security and economically motivate the pool operators to actually create one pool, just pool all their resources into one. So, I mean, that would be my basically last sort of
but then you also run into this unintended problem of the minute you start building these protocol level restrictions, what happens when I have 10 pools and each and every one of them is for a specific purpose? So you have the same owner, the same operator of the 10 pools, but each and every one of them has a different social purpose. Like one is to save the elephants and one is to save the giraffes and so forth. Should we restrict that protocol? The protocol would not be able to differentiate that from the one pool, the 1% pool situation. So that's another situation to think about.
Well, they could just make one pool and split the rewards manually. For example, it's just
but what if I hate giraffes but I like elephants?
Yeah, that's why the protocol should handle it and not social media. That's why. But yeah, I know what you mean. All right. Any other questions in chat? Looks good. Someone in chat asked, "Is Charles running for president? Is that happening?" Let's wrap it up on that one, guys. Any bid for public office, Charles?
You should listen to my speech at the Independent National Convention, where I was talking about what they do with Oppo research. I've lived a colorful and exciting life. I don't think I would survive that phase of the political process if I ran for president. I think I'll just stick to building blockchains and growing mushrooms. And one of these days I'll go into regenerative medicine, and I'll probably do something with Dr. Lesser.
Well, that's a pretty good. I guess that's a no. Here, I'll summarize.
It's
no.
a no, unless the political system radically changes, or I become like Trump and I just don't care at all, and I'm like, whatever. That's Tuesday.
Yeah, it's Tuesday. I think I'll run for office. Yeah. Oh, and there's some folks ask about, could we address what's going to happen when a contract with IOG ends? I don't know if that's something that we would be discussing here. We're trying to stick to pledge and A0. That's a long term and that's a CEO decision. So I'm not going to put Charles on the seat for that.
Well, I just wrote briefly on that. It's like, don't even worry about it, because we're not even going to talk about it until everything's done that needed to be done with 2020. So that means Voltaire's running, smart contracts are where they need to be. And Shelley's gone through at least a few iterations like what we're doing right now. And at that point, it's going to be self-evident on how to do the renewal. We have an idea for how to do it. We actually have dedicated product people who are working on it. And I think when the time comes, people are going to be pleasantly surprised and very happy with the proposal we have on the table, because we're trying to solve this problem generically. Mm-hmm. So it's not just about how do we get IOHK to continue and have a Cardano 2025 roadmap, but it's also about how, in general, for cryptocurrency infrastructure maintenance without having to do an ICO and keep building new tokens. If you have a treasury, do you maintain those systems long term? And we think we have a generic solution that we can reapply to Cardano generation after generation and keep broadening the set of people who work on it from just a handful of entities to dozens to eventually, like Linux, hundreds.
Yep. All right. Thank you, Charles. Nick, you guys ready to call it a night?
Yep.
Yep.
I'm good.
All right, guys. Hey, thank you everyone for coming on here. I appreciate your time and good discussion. There's a few questions about Rena. Check out Pay's channel if you want to learn more about Rena. Pay just did a interview with the gentleman working on Rena. All right, so thanks, guys. Have a good night and keep pushing forward. Why? Because we're going for number one, right? Going for number one.
For number one.
All day, every day, going for number one.